Okay, members, a quorum is present. We ask our guests and visitors in the rear of the chamber and in the gallery to please stand for the prayer. We ask our Assembly Chaplain, Father Constantine Papadimos, to offer the day's prayer.
Good morning. Let us pray. Lord, as we live each day, so many people ask for our help. Between family, friends, and constituents, satisfying so many needs can become overwhelming and lead to a great deal of guilt. But by keeping our focus on you, Lord, we can get a handle on the guilt we may feel. In your own way, you will let us know if we're going overboard or overdoing it. Inspire us to keep our focus on you, Lord, by showing love and kindness to others, and guide us to do the right thing at the right time. Amen.
We ask our guests and visitors to remain standing and join us for the flag salute. Please join Assemblymember Berryhill as he leads us in the pledge. Mr. Berryhill.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Reading of the previous day's journal.
Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Monday, January 30th, 2012. The Assembly met at 12 noon. Honorable Fiona Ma, Speaker Pro Tem of the Assembly, Bryan, Chief Gary Dawson Wilson at the desk. Reading clerk Timothy Moreland reading. The roll was called to Shaw, Gina, Alejo, Allen, Amiano, Atkins, Bell, Berryhill, Block, Blumenfield,
Mr.
Bonilla.
Calderon moves and Mr. Hagman seconds that the reading of the previous day's journal be dispensed with. Presentations of petitions, there are none. Introduction and reference of bills will be deferred. Reports of committees will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Messages from the governor, there are none. Messages from the Senate, there are none. Motions and resolutions. The absences for the day will be deemed read and printed in the journal. Mr. Calderon.
Yes, Madam Speaker, members, I move to waive Rule 45.5 to allow Mr. Smythe to speak in adjourned memory.
Without objection. Okay, business on the daily file. Second reading, clerk will read.
Assembly concurrent Resolution 91 with amendments.
All bills will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Okay, Assembly third reading. File items 4 and 5, passed and retained. File item 6, AB 1148. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1148 by Assemblymember Brownlee and others, an act relating to the Political Reform Act of 1974.
Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. AB 1148, I think, is a very important bill to improve disclosure of spending in elections by revealing major funding sources directly on all campaign advertisements. Campaign spending has skyrocketed in recent years, in particular spending on independent expenditures. At the national level, escalating attack ads by anonymous super PACs have come to define the presidential primary rather than where the focus should be, and that is on the candidates themselves. Here in California, wealthy special interests have routinely played... Madam Speaker, could I have the attention of the floor, please? Thank you. Wealthy special interests have routinely played kingmaker, thwarting contribution limits through unlimited spending, through independent expenditures and ballot measure committees that are now significantly shaping the way our state is governed. Many of these committees purposely establish themselves in a way that hides who exactly is funding the campaign messages that voters see and hear, and voters are frustrated and fed up with confusing and misleading information. To underscore this point, in a recent field poll, found that 84% of California voters believe that public disclosure requirements of initiatives must more clearly identify who are its major funders. This number holds true for Californians regardless of political ideology. 86% of Democrats, 78% of Republicans, 88% of independents, 83% of voters who identify as Tea Party supporters, and 84% of union households. A survey conducted by the Greenlining Institute similarly found that 59% of voters would be less likely to elect candidates who voted against improving funding disclosure on political ads. Again, this number is consistent across political parties. 57% of Democrats, 52% of Republicans want elected officials who support campaign disclosure. AB 1148 will require the largest major funders of political ads for candidates and ballot measures in California to be clearly and unambiguously identified directly on television, radio, and direct mail. In the recent Citizens United decision, which justified unlimited independent expenditures in elections, did so only because the court reasoned that disclosure permits citizens to react to the speech in a proper way. The court went on to say this transparency enables the electorate to make informed decisions and give proper weight to different speakers and messages. Previous court cases have also repeatedly ruled that campaign disclosure is necessary to prevent corruption or the appearance of corruption. California has long been a pioneer in campaign finance reform, and we must continue to lead on this issue on behalf of our constituents who have demanded more transparency. AB 1148 has been endorsed by editorial boards across California, from the San Bernardino Sun to the Bakersfield Californian to the San Jose Mercury News. It is strongly supported by leaders in the good government movement, such as Common Cause and the League of Women Voters, and dozens of other reform advocates, seniors, faith-based organizations, local government, environmental, and business organizations. Over 20,000 Californians just in the past few months have signed a petition urging that this bill be passed. Members, at a time when public confidence in government and the electoral process has hit rock bottom, strengthening disclosure requirements on political advertising is necessary to help Californians be better informed and proudly participate in an open, transparent democracy. With that, I respectfully ask for a strong aye vote on this floor on this important measure.
Mr. Wagner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and reluctantly I rise in opposition to the bill, and let me explain briefly why. The idea that there are large majorities of people out there looking for us to add yet another layer of campaign finance reform, add another layer of disclosure, is all well and good, with the one exception or one problem that it frankly runs afoul of the First Amendment. Compelled political speech, our Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, has held as something that is prohibited by the First Amendment. In the McIntyre case, as far back as the mid-1990s, the court talked about, under our Constitution, the history and practice of anonymity, and indeed calls that an honorable tradition of advocacy and of dissent. And anonymity is a shield from the tyranny of the majority. It thus exemplifies the purpose behind the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment. This bill takes us in the wrong direction. It is a matter of compelled speech. It is a matter that, frankly, were it challenged in court, the First Amendment would likely tell this legislature we've gone too far here. It also, I think, will end up having the same pernicious effect that we've seen with almost all of our campaign finance laws, and the reason that we keep coming back and trying to fix them. Every time we provide some restriction, money finds a way, it goes underground, we drive it more and more underground. That will happen here. We ought be true to the Constitution that we all took an oath to support. We ought to be true to the First Amendment. We ought to be true to the traditions and history of this country that were exemplified in the McIntyre Supreme Court case. This is that bridge too far. I urge a no vote consistent with the finest traditions of American constitutional law.
Mr. Donnelly?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I see this as an assault on the First Amendment, because the net effect of this, whether the intent is to silence free speech, which I don't believe it is, I believe the intent is to bring transparency. The net effect is that when people know that their name or their company logo is going to be plastered in the first couple seconds of an ad, they're going to think twice. And I think we should really take pause when we are approaching something this significant, which is the First Amendment is not just the right of free speech. It is the right to seek redress of our grievances from our government. And the way we do that is through politics and through ads and through promoting campaigns and causes. And I have to note that one of the most significant changes we could make to this body is to make every law apply to ourselves, to this body, to government, that applies to the general public. And I happen to recall that in this body, when one member called out who supports many of the people who sit in these seats, namely public employee unions, she was shouted down and gavelled down, and I think it's a bit of hypocrisy. I urge a no vote.
Mr. Nestandi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am in favor of transparency and full disclosure, as I'm sure all members of this body are. The problem is, I think this bill uses pretzel logic to get to that point. The proliferation of independent expenditures, PACs, super PACs, have been because of limitations on contributions to individual candidates. So you have this rise, this proliferation of all these IEs and money coming from 100 different directions that you're trying to track down and get disclosure from. Pretty soon, candidates are pretty much going to sit home and phone it in and just let the IEs and the super PACs do battle. That's a bad way to run elections. That's bad for the public. Allow full disclosure to every individual candidate, make them take responsibility for their own campaign, and allow money to flow freely to those candidates and let them do battle with each other, not trying to chase down this never-ending quest to get disclosure from 100 different groups that disguise their donors. Somebody gives to this group, they give to that group, and then that shows up in the campaign. It's ridiculous. Vote no on the bill.
Mr. Fong.
Hi, I rise in support of AB 1148. California's existing disclosure laws are some of the better disclosure laws in the country. Even though our disclosure laws are strong, our campaigns that don't want voters to know who's funding an advertisement have found ways to obscure that information. That's why this bill is important. AB 1148 requires the highest funders for each campaign advertisement, whether radio, television, or in print, to prominently disclose their identity on the advertisement itself. It seeks to make funding disclaimers on campaign advertisement as simple and straightforward as possible so that disclaimers are meaningful to voters. As a result, AB 1148 will improve transparency in political campaigns and advertisements, and ultimately will ensure that voters are better informed when they vote and encourage confidence in the electoral process. I urge your aye vote.
Mr. Monning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I want to thank the author for bringing this forward. I want to urge a yes vote. Quite simply, this bill requires disclosure, transparency of the highest contributors to these super PACs, to independent expenditure committees. The Supreme Court, in the Citizens United decision, equated free speech to the ability to spend unlimited amounts of money. So we now have a system where you have a louder voice if you have more money, and those with the most money have the loudest voice. And as my colleague Mr. Nastandi said, they are squeezing out the voices of candidates in races because we have limits in what we can raise. Some of us accept limits as to what we will spend. But the independent expenditure, the super PAC, there are no limits. This bill simply provides that when voters are going to make that decision at the ballot box and they've seen 30-second TV ads saturating their television sets or mailers coming into their home, they should simply have the right to know who were the largest contributors to that stream of information or perhaps misinformation. This is good government. It is an appropriate response to the Citizens United decision removing any limits to those who want to exercise the loudest voice in our political system. I urge a yes vote.
Dr. Halderman?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a good-intentioned bill that does what it didn't mean to do. Anybody heard of George Soros? He's kind of a notorious anti-Semite, anti-American. This is his dream bill. This absolutely allows him to go to whichever warm and fuzzy-sounding organization involving little helpless woodland creatures, donate the money that way, and that's the logo that ends up. If that weren't objectionable enough, I think what this bill does unintendedly is to put at risk even small donors to retaliation based on violation of their First Amendment rights. I don't think this gets us where we want to go. I'd love to continue working on this, but in its current form, I don't find this bill supportable. I urge a no vote.
Mr. Williams?
Well, some of us like little woodland creatures here, but it seems to me that opposition to this bill is based off of a defeatist myth that campaign finance law has never changed anything or helped anything. And when I first came to work for the legislature, I made it a habit to listen to old-timers' stories. And believe me, there's no longer, money bags being run around in cars or suitcases. And the reason is campaign finance laws. Now, they don't always do exactly what we hope or are as successful as we hope in cleaning up the process. And that's why we think of better ideas. This is a good idea. It merits bipartisan support. The idea that we now have an initiative process where one particular company will bring forward an initiative to have a competitive advantage upon another company in the same industry speaks to the fact that voters need to be able to see where this money is coming from, who is putting forth these messages, and then they can draw their own conclusions as to why. I support this bill. It's a great bill.
Mr. Gatto.
Thank you. Colleagues, I've heard a couple things from the people arguing against this bill, and the themes sort of go into three arguments. Some people out there have cited the First Amendment and said that this bill will compel speech somehow. Well, surely those same people must be out protesting the supermarket, because when they go there and they see that companies are forced to disclose the ingredients in food, well, gee, that's compelled speech too, right? So that must run afoul of all these court decisions that some of you have cited. Some people out there have cited the traditions of our country. I would submit that they don't understand the traditions of this country. This idea that money is speech sort of implies that the wealthy have more of a First Amendment right than I do. And I sort of take offense to that notion because as someone who is not tremendously wealthy, I believe that the traditions of equality and egalitarianism that this country was founded on would shudder at that. As a matter of fact, this country was founded on rebellion against nobility, right? Nobility, rebellion against the king. And the idea that the uber wealthy have more of a free speech right than you and I think, quite frankly, is offensive. The third thing is, some of the opposition to this bill have said, well, gee, we need to make these things apply to us. Okay, well, then I ask you, Didn't you have to disclose that you paid for the mailers in your campaign, or did you break the law? I asked for an aye vote.
Mr. Fiore?
Like some other bills that come to this floor, this bill is going to require Republicans and Democrats to join together if it's going to move forward. And I wanted to rise because I very much hope that we will see that today, notwithstanding some of the debate that we have heard so far. I would support overturning the Citizens United case. I think it's bad law, and I think it will continue to have an increasingly corrosive effect, not only on our politics in general, but on the public's faith in what we do every day in particular. And a reason why I think we should join together in supporting this bill is that point. Each of us on this floor struggles in our districts to inspire people about the fact that there is integrity and a merit-based focus in our government. Our citizens, our constituents, especially our youngest constituents, are really quite cynical, right, about what we do. This is one small step that we can take to reverse that trend. In the initiative process, for example, we see that most of our constituents strongly support it. But by the same token, most believe that special interests have captured the initiative process at the expense of the public voice. In response to this bill, one key opponent says, we should be content to rely on the fact that voters can get information about who supports a candidate or a cause by going to campaign finance reports that are filed with the Secretary of State. Really? Do most of us think that most of our constituents will take that initiative, have the time in busy days to take those steps? Wouldn't it be something for all of us to stand together and say to our constituents, be they Republican, Democrat, or voters who decline to state their affiliation, that we want to take one small step today to give you access to some key information about who stands for what, who stands behind whom, and help you make a decision as to where you should stand. That's a position that I don't think any of us should turn away from. It's a position that requires bipartisan support, so I rise in support of Ms. Brownlee's measure.
Mr. Portantino.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise in support of this transparency measure. This is good government reform. The public has a right to know how money is being spent in political campaigns, by whom and for what. It is a basic, fundamental disclosure and sunshine issue. There are many sunshine issues that face this body, and I hope as they come forward, we see a chorus embracing sunshine, because sunshine is good today, it is good tomorrow, and it was good yesterday. So we should walk the walk, talk the talk, support Ms. Brownlee's good government reform and other such legislation that reaches this floor, because if we don't, we risk being accused of having situational ethics, and that's not good for anybody. Sunshine is the way to go. Let's embrace this good government reform and truly mean it.
Ms. Harkey?
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I wasn't going to speak up, but I've heard a lot of comments here, so I just want to make a few of my own. We hear transparency again and again and again. The voters hear transparency again and again and again, and they do not get transparency. They get money driven more underground and hidden more. We have initiative after initiative because this body will not vote on the floor to do what whoever thinks is necessary to be done. We are a representative democracy, and we have given that up to the initiative process time and time again. I don't think that you can force in my own city, I know there's a lot of people that are afraid to contribute more than $100 or $100 or more because they don't want to be on a report. They're afraid of being on a report. This does, in fact, require that there be websites posted, and these people have to put their name on issues that they support. It will drive small people as well as large organizations underground to hide just a little bit more. We cannot take money out of politics. It's been tried for years. It doesn't happen. It's kind of what it's about is distribution, therefore, of wealth or or resources. That's what it's about in every country, and that's why we battle ideologically here on the floor. So while I appreciate that we're trying to do something that appears transparent, I just hear this word used continually, and it is the least transparent of all words. Every time I hear it these days, I shudder because I know something's coming that is maybe just going to add another layer so that people get more and more discouraged because they are counting on us for good government policy. And I don't doubt that this is an effort at transparency that's been through committee after committee after committee, and so it's been amended. But unfortunately, we are setting ourselves up to disappoint the voters one more time when they think they've got full disclosure. They will not have full disclosure, and they still won't know who's funding anything. So I think more to the point, we need to start making decisions on this floor. There is a huge majority party on this floor, and I would like to see more decisions come to the floor where we can argue them out in a fashion that is keeping with the decorum of this House, and make decisions for the people that we are supposed to represent. I think that's a very much unused process here. So I support the effort to try to increase transparency. I don't think we do that. I don't think we can do that. I think the examples were made of George Soros and other large corporations and whatnot that will just merely funnel their money to nice fuzzy animal organizations, which I love fuzzy animals. I have several. So I think that this is making a problem worse. It's not really solving an issue, and I would look forward to working with Ms. Brownlee to come up with something that maybe decreases the layers that we have so that people can get more to the source and actually hear the issues that are being discussed, and they're having to decide on the ballot, every ballot. Thank you.
Ms. Yamada.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise in strong support of AB 1148. As a proud co-author of this bill, I want to thank Ms. Brownlee for her courage in bringing this measure forward. Yes, this vote is a vote for transparency. A vote no means that I think people have something to hide. I urge an aye vote. If you have nothing to fear, then I urge an aye vote.
Mr. Norby.
I reluctantly oppose the bill, Madam Speaker. I've been lobbied hard on this, and I really appreciate that. The author, my good friend from Santa Monica, sat behind me on the plane to L.A. on Thursday and was telling me about the bill. I appreciate that, too. I had some people coming to my office talking about the bill, but the more people that talked to me about it, the more questions I had and the more complicated it seemed to get. The idea of replacing a lot of fine print with corporate logos at first seemed to make sense. Because corporate logos are identifiable, the fine print, no one reads that anyway. Some said, well, if Chevron's on there, people are going to vote against it because everybody hates oil companies. Well, a Chevron sign looks pretty good in the middle of the night when you're about to run out of gas. And for some people, it's going to look pretty good on an ad. Others will say, well, the unions will have their logos and, well, whatever. But there are some things about this maybe the author could clear up for me. The 3 seconds at the end, it has to be 3 seconds of silence showing these logos. And to me, it seems a little odd. A lot of people don't necessarily watch TV all the time. They kind of listen to it when they're washing the dishes, and when they hear that 3 seconds, they're not going to see the logos, and they might think there's something wrong with their TV. I'm also concerned about how this applies to candidates. People, including the author, says that candidates, well, clearly we don't have $10,000 contributors, and we don't have a top 3. We have like a top, 50 or 60 or 70, depending on who you all are maxed out. So I think she means IEs that support candidates because they can't give to the candidate their choice. And that's the whole problem with nibbling around the edges like this, is that the only reason the IEs exist is because people are not free to give to the candidate of their choice. And I think now is the year to look at lifting these limits statewide, federally, and allow people to contribute who they want, and then the candidate themselves are responsible for the message. If 10 of Mitt Romney's millionaire friends want to contribute directly to his campaign, let them. I mean, Newt will tell us who they are and tell us what they're like. And if there's a rich guy in Vegas that wants to give Newt $1.5 million, let him do that too, instead of giving it to an IE, which is beyond the control of the candidate, who Gingrich admits is saying things untrue about Romney, but he says, look, if I called him on the phone and told him to change the message, I'd be guilty of a felony. That's collusion with an IE. I can't control the message of people who want to help me because they can't contribute to me. And that's where we ought to look. And if we don't look there, the situation is going to continue to get more and more complicated. I have a question about slate mailers as well, because a lot of IEs buy things on slate mailers. A lot of candidates do. A lot of initiatives buy space on slate mailers. These slate mailers are divided up in terms of who's giving to what. I'm not sure how this would apply to them. I just see an FPPC nightmare here. Well, not an FPPC dream world of complications that they can throw at us when we try to abide by the law, but we're not really sure where the law is. As for fuzzy creatures, as a member of the Norwegian caucus, the trolls of Norway, they're out there somewhere, and they're alive, and we still believe in them. One comment about old-timer stories. Yeah, the good old days are not as good as they may have said they were. But at the same time, we have a picture of a man in one of the biggest hearing rooms in this capital, Jesse Unruh. Yes, he said money is the mother's milk of politics. But he also had another longer quote, all of which I can't say on the floor here. But in the end it said, look him straight in the eye and still vote against them, no matter where the money is, then you don't belong here. Cynicism may be at an all-time high. Was cynicism higher in the 1950s when we had none of these laws? When we built great transportation, great water systems, and we weren't burdened with all these complications? Some of these burdens, some of these disclosures I think are important, but at the same time, when we talk about how cynical the public is, maybe it's because we've created this melange of laws that the public itself doesn't understand. And when candidates hit each other with violating laws and getting around laws, I don't know if it makes it clear. I would go in the direction of full disclosure by the candidate and the ability of them to raise all the money that they can to their candidacies. And if we had that, then we wouldn't need to try to regulate these IEs. These IEs are limitless. That's true. They're governed by the First Amendment, by the right of free speech. We can't get around the First Amendment. It's not a loophole.
30 seconds.
And instead of trying to close it, let's expand it and have true disclosure, which is candidate accountability.
Mr. Amiano.
I stand in strong support of this effort. I feel that what happened around Citizens United was a real knockout punch, but I think we are now going to be able to recover by taking this action. In San Francisco, we do have public financing, and we also have contribution limits that have really leveled the playing field, but unless we have something that is institutionalized, we'll never change the dynamic. It's true that money's always been important in politics. That doesn't make it right. If I may quote Bill Moyers, I was told that Bill Moyers was on Stephen Colbert last night, and he said, "I'll believe a corporation is a person when Texas executes one." This is Tom Amiano, and I approve of this message.
Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One point that was brought up by my colleagues that I just want to bring up is that this is becoming a disclosure versus non-disclosure type of vote, and that's not the case. Republicans are always for full disclosure. This bill was introduced in March. It had opposed to less amend, and we had a bunch of author amendments that we would like to have work with the author to come out to have a bipartisan, clean reform bill come out of this House. Those amendments were never taken. It was amended by the author just in the last couple of weeks, where we couldn't even offer amendments because of the deadline of this House. So we want to work with our colleagues to come up with full disclosure for this state. We're always for that. Bring us into the process where we can actually do something on the last day when we have something we can't support. Urge a no vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Ms. Brownlee, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's been a lot said about this bill. I think there have been some factual statements and some non-factual statements. But let me just conclude by saying this. There are many issues in this body that we disagree on every single day, but disclosure and accountability shouldn't be one of those issues. And members, understand that just in the 2010 election cycle, there was $235 million spent on initiatives alone by committees with vague names such as Californians to Protect Our Right to Vote, which is not even coming from a voting rights organization. Standing behind a real misleading sort of name. Do we want to continue this process. There's a lot of talk about free speech and the First Amendment and reference to the McIntyre case. I'm not a lawyer, but the McIntyre case was back in 1995, almost 20 years old, and election practices and laws have changed immensely over the years, with more and more money being spent independently by special interest. And as evidenced by the Citizens United ruling, the trend seems to be unlimited spending, but justified by disclosure. And the Citizens United case, which said unlimited spending is legal and constitutional, they also reiterated in the McConnell ruling that disclosures and disclaimers were constitutional. And also relative to the amount of time on ads, this is about advertising, TV advertising, radio advertising, print advertising. Our intent is to be as short as possible, but to be clear and transparent and effective. We know the longer an ad is, the less we lose people. They get bored. So we want to make these messages as short as possible, and we believe that in radio we make it much shorter than in current law. And in print, we're making it not much change except making it clearer. And maybe in television, it's going to be another second or two. But you have to balance that with real information that the voters are going to get. And finally, I would just conclude. In a recent Ventura County Star article, I wanted to quote Dan Schnur, who made some comments about this bill. Dan Schnur, you all know, was a former chairman of the Fair Political Practices Commission and is now currently the director of the Jesse M. Unruh Institute of Politics at USC. And he said it was surprising that the political establishment in Sacramento would work quietly to try to kill such a change. And he said, quote, "One thing upon which the strongest reformers and the most ardent opponents of campaign finance reform have always agreed is on the need of disclosure. At least in theory," he said. "One of the things I found during my time with the FPPC is that loyalty to disclosure disappeared when it moved from the theoretical into the realm of the practical. And I say, let's do the right thing and put disclosure into the practical, move it from the theoretical, and put it into practice. I respectfully ask for your aye vote."
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Ms. Brownlee moves the call. File items 7 and 8, pass and retain. File item 9, AB 467. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 467 by Assemblymember Ng and others, an act relating to the environment and declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Mr. Ng.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This bill, AB 467, is a local government bill. It's a bill that allows local governments to take precious resources that they have spent to clean up their polluted water and recover that when they apply for Proposition 84 grants. This measure has received bipartisan support. We worked with Ledge Council on recent amendments that helps satisfy all questions. This bill has not received any no votes. It's sponsored by the San Gabriel Valley Basin Water Quality Authority and has the support of the San Gabriel Valley Legislative Caucus and has no opposition. Members, this is an urgency measure because at this very second, as we speak, funds are being allocated from Prop 84, and a yes vote will make sure that local entities have the precious resources that they need when, like water, they have very, very scarce resources. Respectfully request an aye vote.
Seeing no further questions or debate, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 71, noes 2 on the urgency. Ayes 71, noes 2 on the measure. Measure passes. File items 10 and 11 pass and retain. Okay, we're going to go back to items for reconsideration. File item 2, pass and retain. File item 3, AB 327. I'm sorry. File item 2 is continued. File item 3, AB 327. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 327 by Assemblymember Davis, an act relating to sentencing.
Mr. Davis, on your motion to reconsider.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. AB 327 is simply amending three strikes to make sure that we are not just tough on crime, but that we are smart on crime. Additionally, it makes sure that people are serving the proportionate and appropriate time for the crime that they commit. And equally, this bill will make sure that we have a financial review of our criminal justice system so that we are able to effectively use the millions of dollars. In fact, $15 additional million in 10 years will be realized as we apply appropriate time to crime in three strikes. We are not getting rid of three strikes. We are not voting against three strikes. We are being smart on crime by appropriately adjusting a flaw in three strikes that has cost us millions of dollars. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Okay, members, this is on reconsideration. Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We do oppose this motion. Ask for a roll call vote.
Okay, Mr. Hagman is opposing the motion to reconsider this vote. Mr. Davis is asking for an aye vote. Mr. Hagman's asking for a no vote. Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Takes 41 votes. Mr. Davis is asking for an aye vote. Mr. Hagman is asking for a no vote on the motion to reconsideration. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 42, noes 24. Motion carries. Okay, so now we can take up the bill. Mr. Davis, file item 3, AB 327. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 327 by Assemblymember Davis, an act relating to sentencing.
Mr. Davis, on your bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. We have an opportunity to not be tough on crime alone, but to additionally be smart on crime, to save the voters of California up to $50 million in 20 years, and in 10 years, $15 million by making sure that people serve the appropriate time for the crimes that they commit. We unfortunately had a flaw in the policy that we implemented initially, and we are experiencing an overcrowding and also a realignment, which obviously is something that we have to implement. At the same time, while we're doing that, we have the responsibility to make sure that not only that citizens of California serve the appropriate time in jail that they should, but that also we are responsible as policymakers to make sure we police policy so that it is appropriate policy that does not inadvertently cost taxpayers millions of wasted dollars because of our failure to have oversight on policy. I simply ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the author brings up that we need to make decisions about inmates serving their appropriate time. I wish we had that discussion before we passed 109 last year, releasing thousands of inmates out of our jails, both in the county and the prison level. Let's look at the three strikes. The three-strike system worked. as our population increases in California, the crime has decreased ever since 3 strikes been passed in by the voters. It is a deterrent to crime. And we put a fiscal number on how much that is, $15 million over 5 years. How much crime are we deterring in this state? How much pain and suffering and loss do we have for our residents because we have 3 strikes, and we deter those crimes from happening? Our phenomenon was cited by the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor in one of her opinions. She noted it was a positive consequence of 3 strikes. She wrote that 3 strikes turnaround started in 1994. It was the first time more parolees left the state than entered the state since 1976. Some will say that other factors were responsible for the drop in crime, but I think the evidence strongly suggests otherwise. Having more people but lower crime doesn't happen on its own. It happens because tough on crime laws like 3 strikes. There's no need to modify this successful law. I urge your no vote.
Mr. Nielsen?
Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the Assembly, I'm nearly incredulous that this honorable body is devoting so much time to something that is going to cause great grief to the people that we represent. That in itself represents an egregious compromise of justice. Justice, the only thing that the broken hearts of victims can hearken to for comfort. Justice. You are undermining justice, trivializing violent criminal acts. Keep in mind, methamphetamine user. First time around, Penal Code 273, abuse of spouse. Next time around on methamphetamine, he gets a little more angry. Methamphetamine is the mean drug. A little more angry, and he crushes the face of his spouse, disfiguring her forever. 2 times. Next time, all he does is a petty theft. No big deal. Somebody who lost that property didn't mind giving it up to the well-being of that parolee who wanted to use the money to buy methamphetamine, which might embolden him to kill that spouse. And that's happened, folks, because they get mad that the spouse turned them in. 3rd time. No big deal. It is a big deal. 3 strikes works. Maybe you haven't, but I have many times witnessed the absolute collapse and anguished wail of a victim next of kin, either in a hearing or on the streets, as they envision in their mind's eye or in their hearts the blood all over their loved one, or as they come upon that loved one in the streets, the anguished wail. That rings in my ears, and I cannot forget it. And just a couple of weeks ago, I think I said yesterday, I had a dream about it. The first time I've ever dreamt and relived in a dream the tragedies that you are condoning by watering down, by compromising 3 strikes and justice. And how dare we trivialize and put a price on justice? We have to be easy on criminals because it costs us too much money in the budget. And we need to spend that money on wonderful things. Folks, yes, we should, and I would that we could. But the answer is not watering down our sentencing legislation like the bill yesterday as far as giving a break to sex offenders in their registration, tiering their fault, or compromising 3 strikes as we're trying yet again to do now. Nor is the answer public safety realignment, dumping all these unrehabilitated in the community. The answer is long-term, 10 and 20 years of intervention in the lives, strengthening the family instead of undermining it, which this legislature regularly also does, undermining the family and parental authority, but also intervening in the lives of those youth. And then you will lower the rate of criminality because you will have intervened early, and that's the best time to turn around a criminal in their careers. The way not to is to bless them as they continue that criminality, as you will be doing with this bill. The only folks today who are waiting with bated breaths and will cheer upon the announcement of a passage vote will be the inmates in California state prisons and the parolees on our streets. And the only one to suffer will be all those people that we represent.
Ms. Mitchell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my understanding that the rules of the House do allow us to call for the question, but it's not the habit of this body, since the minority party has issue when they aren't allowed to speak at length on issues that are of concern to them. So what I will say is that we debated this at length less than 24 hours ago, and with that, I ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Wagner?
My good colleague stole some of my thunder. We did discuss this just 24 hours ago. It failed passage, and nothing's changed. Certainly over the course of the last 24 hours, I didn't hear from my constituents telling me that I need to reconsider my vote and think again about making it easier to let serious criminals like those identified by my good colleague Mr. Nielsen out of prison. I certainly didn't hear from my community saying that we need to be easier on criminals. Nothing has changed. The people aren't clamoring for this bill. The people aren't even asking for this bill. This will do nothing but, as we discussed at length yesterday, and I will not elaborate, this will do nothing more than open the floodgates to the courts. Our society, our constituents have said to us, after someone has committed 2 violent crimes, we want to treat them harshly. We want to get their attention because we don't want them to do that to us again. We are betraying our constituents if we go back on what they have explicitly told us they want. And I certainly didn't hear it yesterday. The bill was defeated yesterday, should be defeated today.
Mr. Amiano?
Yes, I am a strong supporter of this bill, as I said yesterday, and the proposal is long overdue. It's always disappointing to hear such simplistic, moralistic pushback on this bill. If you look at what this bill has done, it has worked to create some of the greatest disparities, not this bill, but 3 strikes, in sentencing across counties for similar conduct. It has worked to put black and brown people away for life at highly disproportional rates. It has accelerated prison growth, and we haven't even realized the geriatric cost to the state yet, and it has had no effect on the crime rate, according to academics who have looked at this issue. If longer sentences made people safe, California would be the safest place on the planet. We are asking that we give the voters a chance to fix this draconian law, and if people are really sincere about keeping those who commit the most egregious crimes, this bill allowing the vote on this, and my constituents and many constituents in California are clamoring for reform of 3 strikes, and there, I understand there's going to be a ballot measure or an initiative soon. So I think it's disingenuous to say we haven't heard from anybody on this. The clamor about this has been constant for many years. So just let's take the bull by the horns, let the people vote.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also rise in opposition to this bill. I just want to point out a couple of things that the bill contains. You have to ask yourself, who are the 3 strikes offenders and what are their profiles? And I'll give you the answer. The average age of a 3 strikes offender is 31, who average a new arrest every 6 months and a new conviction every 9 months. What are the crimes that are included in this bill? Solicitation to commit murder, human trafficking, possession of a weapon of mass destruction, gang recruiting, felony elder abuse, felony child abuse, and manufacturing PCP or meth near children. If we pass AB 327, the criminals who commit these crimes will no longer be eligible to receive a 3rd strike. Before you vote, I urge you to set the rhetoric of the proponents aside and consider who really will not be given a 3rd strike sentence under AB 327. Members, 40 people voted for this yesterday. And it's under reconsideration because it couldn't get the 41st vote. I appeal to the 40 of you that voted for it to vote no today. The majority party and the governor have created a new noun in this state. We now have a new description of a person called a 109er. And in the future, and in today already, we are going to see in the headlines across the state of California, so-and-so's name, a 109er, committed such and such crime, and that person should have never been let out of jail and or prison. And today, we're arguing to let even more 109ers out of prison. Members, I appeal again to the 40 of you that voted aye yesterday. Please change your vote today to no. Thank you.
Ms. Skinner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I rise in support of the bill. And yes, we did have a very thorough debate yesterday, but I did not participate in it. But I feel today it's appropriate to do so. At a time when our corrections costs, our prison budget, is one of the fastest growing portions of our state budget, and at a time when we have had to cut funding to our colleges, our universities, our K-12 schools, our basic social services, many of the things that might assist us in preventing people from getting into the situation of facing prison sentences. That why would we not, at this point in time, give our voters, give the residents of California the opportunity to weigh into this question once again, because that's what this measure does. It allows them to look at whether they want to make a modification to a law that, yes, they overwhelmingly supported, and whether, given the facts that we understand now, is it appropriate to make some modification. That's what this bill does. The fear-mongering that's been thrown out on the floor today will continue and would happen if this gets on the ballot, but at least the voters would get to choose, and they would have to sift through and determine what they feel in this matter. And I think because we cannot modify it ourselves, this gives us the ability to let our voters weigh in on something that is a crucial expenditure within our state budget and a rising and significant one. Thank you.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Let the people vote. I'm all for that. They did. 71% of them said this is a great law. We let them vote. It was only 18 years ago. I ask you, if Kimber Reynolds had been assassinated last night, would we be having this discussion today? I don't think so. Because that is the issue. That is the issue. That's what started this whole deal. It wasn't the polyclass. It was that issue that started this on our trajectory today. The people saw this. They said that that person should have never been out of jail and shouldn't have been able to kill Kimber Reynolds that night. Now, I wanted to put out a couple things that were discussed today. People are clamoring for three strikes reform. They're not talking about roads or water. They're not talking about schools. They're clamoring for three strikes reform. I find that humorous, that people would be clamoring for three strikes reform, when three strikes has done what the people wanted it to do. In 1994, we established this. In 1996, we saw the biggest drop in homicides in California history. I think that that has something to do with three strikes law. Assaults have been down. Rapes have been down. Homicides went down for 15 years. And still we're talking about that three strikes doesn't work. We're talking about saving $15 million in 10 years. There was a study that came out and said that the three strikes, people that were behind bars, had saved, now we had saved $50 billion in the crimes that they would have done since 1994. That's a big savings. Those are the savings to the taxpayers. But we're trying to save $15 million in 10 years so that we can be a little bit more lenient on people who already had 2 shots. But now that 3rd shot, you know what? We got to give you a little bit more leniency because we believe that you're going to get it. You're going to figure it out one day. You know, they're not going to. Maybe the next bill that will come before this floor will say 3 strikes is not enough. There should be 5 strikes. There should be 9. Because, you know, at some point, they're going to get it. And we shouldn't put them behind bars just because they haven't figured it out quick enough. 3 strikes was a bill that worked. It still works today. As Mario Cuomo said when we were discussing this, he said, 3 strikes and you're out in baseball. But this law should be 3 strikes and you're in permanently. That was his words. Same as Pete Wilson when he talked about this. This is working. Why would we be clamoring about something that's working? I ask for a no vote.
Dr. Halderman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It has been 24 hours only since we discussed this issue, and in the last 24 hours, I don't believe that Mike Reynolds has forgotten how painful it was when he was told his daughter Kimber was murdered. It has been 24 hours since I mentioned the name of the 1-year-old Adam Carvajal in 2004, who in Fresno, one day his mother got a visit from a doctor in a hallway of a hospital and told that the baby may never walk again. I don't understand why this would be our priority at this time. I respect that each of you represents your constituencies and that perhaps your constituencies do in fact want to excuse from the 3 strikes laws some of the crimes that are listed here. Mine do not. In my district, my constituents have been very vocal that the attempted murder of a child merits being locked up 25 to life. Just because Adam Carvajal was not murdered, he was only maimed and paralyzed, does not mean that the person who brutalized him should get a get out of jail free pass for that 1 strike. I'm glad someone mentioned manufacturing methamphetamine near children. That is the #1 reason for 40% of the admissions to trauma burn units for children in this state. If you have never had the opportunity to see a 6-year-old who has been burned over 70% of his body because of the explosion of the meth lab that Daddy had in the garage, please count your blessings. If felony child abuse doesn't merit being locked away, I don't understand what does. I respect your representation of your constituents who believe that these folks should get strike #4, but I must represent my own constituency in Fresno County and urge a no vote.
Mr. Bradford?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of AB 327. Yesterday, I sat here in silence and listened to all the reasons why we should or we shouldn't support this measure. But in plain, simple terms, all we're doing is giving the voters of California an opportunity to amend, if they choose to, a law that is completely flawed in how it's being applied to people of color. And the reason you probably haven't had any constituents clamoring at your door to amend it is because maybe you don't represent people of color. But people in my district are no softer on crime than any other place in this state, and there is a need for this bill to be amended. 3 strikes no more deters crime than the death penalty. We've debated that as well. This is not a deterrent on crime. But this bill is not being applied fairly across the state of California when it affects people of color. And I assure you, the majority of folks who experience 3 strikes are people of color. So this is the point we're trying to raise here today, an issue of fairness in giving the voters a right to choose if, in fact, they want to amend it. We're not doing it here today. All we're doing is giving the voters of California a right to express their vote. I ask for aye vote.
Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I urge a no vote on AB 327. I agree that we have a problem with how much we're spending on corrections, but the solution is to stop offering Cadillac health care to prisoners, not letting repeat offending criminals out of prison.
Mr. Calderon?
I did try and resist putting up my mic. But we got to focus this debate back on the issue. You know, the issue isn't that we don't want to protect people from criminals or that we don't care about victims of crime. The issue is money. And there are no free rides. If we want to incarcerate more and more Californians and keep them there, then we have to pay for it. And right now, you've heard this statistic, we pay more money to keep a person in prison than we do to educate a child to keep them out of prison in the first place. There's no more money to cut in programs that might ultimately turn the heart of a child black because of the conditions that they have to survive in and grow up in. No medical care. Let's take away all their medical care. Let's take away any help that their parents have right now while they're trying to find a job. Let's take away their education. These are the kinds of programs that keep people out of prison. So I feel the heartfelt comments being made on both sides of the aisle about the victims of crime, but they are empty words without putting the money to back it up. And to say that there's enough programs that we can cut to be able to keep people in prison is just a falsehood. It's just a falsehood, and we will increase the number of people in prison with no more money to take care of them. And right now, there are prisoners that are being released to the public, being paroled to the public with no rehabilitation. They're going to be with your families and with your children and in the 7-Eleven, in the markets. They have not been rehabilitated. The ones that are getting out now, the ones who have paid their time, if you will, and served their time, they're getting out, and statistics say they're going to find their way back in. 70-80% of them will find their way back in. So if we really care about victims and we really care about the public and the public safety, then we have to bite the bullet and we have to do what's right. We have to fund our prison program if we want to keep people in prison. Otherwise, 3 strikes is undermined. It's undermined because it's not enforced, because there's no money to enforce it. I ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Mansour?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was going to not comment on this today. I was trying to bite my tongue. So many people have said things today that are, it's all been said. Many good points have been made. But I'm very frustrated and upset that the race card is played on this issue. This is a public safety issue. I've heard it said that, gee, this is disproportionately affecting certain neighborhoods or certain types of people or people of this color or that race. Well, what if the statistics showed that this was disproportionately affecting white people or Caucasian people or European people or whatever politically correct or incorrect term you choose to use? Would we be saying, gee, we should overturn this because it's disproportionately affecting this group? I would not be saying that. I would be saying it's working. Those people committed crimes, regardless of the color, regardless of their race. They broke the law. They hurt other people. That's the reason we're here, to protect life, protect property, not to play the race card. I'm so disappointed when I hear that. I urge a no vote. Thank you.
Ms. Harkey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. There's a little bit of history here that I think maybe the newer members that were sworn in last year may not remember, but I know when I first arrived here in 2007, there was a bill, I believe, AB 900. AB 900 called for some stricter sentencing, which we all agreed upon, as well as increasing prisons. And that part that was funded by I think a lease revenue bond or something, there's a bond component to this, has been ignored. There's been a few additions, but not to the extent that the negotiations surrounding the negotiations where we were going to add more prison areas and we were going to be a little tougher on crime. And that was something that was agreed upon bipartisan to get a bill forward. Now, I understand that we're running out of money in this state, but I have a little history here too, and it's not because we're making tough decisions. We are spending in this House right now at 2006 levels. The fact that we sloughed off $5 or $6 billion down for realignment does not change the fact that that's part of the component of what we were spending. We are still spending that. Our spending in the state is going to go up 7% per year per the governor's budget projections, not Diane Harkey's projections. And why is it increasing? Because this state has decided to implement early the Obama health care plan. We are making choices every day in this House. Now, education is suffering because that's the easiest way to get parents to complain and everybody to complain, to raise taxes. Don't pretend it's anything else. If our focus was education, we'd be working on education. If our focus is not public safety, then we just need to announce it right now, because we are already releasing people out to our counties. There's not availability to house them. We're going to have early releases. They don't have the facilities to house them. And now we're looking at a bill that is limiting 3 strikes, and I have all the sympathy in the world for those people who truly maybe have gotten caught in the system. But that's not typical. That's not usual, and it's not very frequent. Most of these people have been caught time and time again and pleaded down their sentences, and we all know that, and we've heard this before. So I am looking for the victims here, the victims and their families, the victims that have to continually face these parole hearings and other things. We have several in our community that I speak to on a regular basis. It's very painful for them. And as hard as it might be for someone who has a child or a friend or a neighbor that maybe just has gone astray that you happen to believe has a good heart somewhere, I mean, I'm sorry. These people are doing without, and our state is doing without public safety. We have our borders are porous. We have a lot of increased in drug crime. There's a lot of things that happen in the inner cities because we're not enforcing public safety. We don't have the education dollars for inner city children, and that's a shame. Unemployment is extremely high in the inner cities. Now, that's something we can and we need to address. But to release prisoners early does not help these people, does not help these kids, does not help these teenagers without jobs. It only brings them closer to a criminal element. And someone who's got 3 strikes, I'm very, very sorry, but I think that they've been, like I said, they have had more than 3 strikes. They just happen to get caught on the 3rd one. So if we want to fund public safety, we can do that. If we want to fund education, we can do that. But we need to rein in other areas that we didn't used to spend quite so much on. And if you look back at 2006 budget, you will see what we spent, you'll see what we're spending now, and you'll see where the money went. Unfortunately, during this last recession, we borrowed a lot of money from the federal government, so we didn't make changes, and we kept funding levels higher than they needed to be.
30 seconds.
We also owe interest on some of the borrowing took from the federal government. So there are decisions we can make. I'm heavily immersed in the budget and in finance, and I'd be glad to work with any of you. But public safety is a #1 role of government, and we need to provide for it. Thank you.
Ms. Atkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I actually wasn't going to speak either on this item, 2 days of discussion, but I had a real hard time letting the race card comment pass. I am not a person of color. It's pretty clear, far from it. But I do come from a very working class, poor background. And I would say it isn't just people of color that don't exactly get proper defense always. It's working poor people. So, you know, I'll stand here as a person from a working class background and say that poor people don't always get the best defense. You know, I could start singing Bob Dylan's Hurricane, but you probably wouldn't like that either. Those of you that remember the song, Bob Dylan, yeah, that you're, at any rate, you know, this is a relevant policy discussion for this body to have. I think it is relevant to have the discussion be put back before the voters and let them determine if they, again, believe that that was the right policy and the right way that we want to spend taxpayer dollars, if maybe we want to take different approaches to how to deal with that. But I just felt compelled to stand and say, you know, there are reasons that we see the people behind bars that we do, and my community's tough on crime too. I represent a community called City Heights in San Diego, more than 85 different languages spoken, new Americans, tough on crime. Night up to light every year, we're there. They're tough on crime. They have a difficult dilemma of seeing what happens to their kids when they come face to face with the criminal justice system, and at the same time they want to protect their kids in their community. So these are not supposed to be easy discussions. I just think that it is an okay thing to let the voters reconfirm for us one way or another, and that is what Mr. Davis is asking us to do today. So I urge your aye vote. I think we can have relevant policy discussions, particularly when we're giving it back to the voters to reconfirm what they think, and I urge your yes vote today.
Seeing no further questions or debate, Mr. Davis, you may close.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and members. There have been so many misconceptions, but I'd like to zero in on just a couple of them that I think are relevant before we make our decision. Our fellow member from Fresno made some reference with regard to people being maimed having some exemption from this. That is absolutely, unequivocally untrue. Acts which were done while in possession of a firearm or deadly weapon, and if in fact somebody was maimed, including using their own hands, that's a deadly weapon. Additionally, some reference was made to the fact that people manufacture methamphetamine, and somehow, in fact, they were going to be exempt. That is unequivocally untrue as well. Controlled substances, controlled substance offense, and the weight or volume of drug that exceeds specific amounts is also not exempt. Finally, one of the other many misconceptions discussed here in this debate, the gentleman from Los Angeles County talked about some data that says that $50 million savings on those who would have committed crime. I'd love to see that data in specific and know what that study was and the name of it, because I don't believe that that is absolutely true. What we have here on the table, ladies and gentlemen, is not an exercise on how we can just embrace a concept that has worked for us politically, but we have a challenge on the table for us as legislators about this policy. And it's painful when we have touted a policy that we have cheerleaded for a couple of years or more to discover that it's not a good policy after all. It is not a good policy to have an individual to serve 25 years for stealing a piece of pizza as one example. The implications of that is that, in fact, as the gentleman said from Commerce, it does cost. In addition to that, we have cost $15 million in 10 years because of that fallacy in this policy. Certainly it's been a popular policy, but it hasn't been the most prudent policy when we get to the application of the third strike. Is it uncomfortable? We know Dr. Martin Luther King said that the measure of a man is not where he stands in times of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a time of challenge and controversy. Do you have the courage in your leadership to make a decision based upon this challenge and revelation that the third strike has not been applied appropriately, and your evidence is the cost to your constituents in the state of California? The NAACP, as one civil rights group, said that we have charged over $8.1 billion, monies of which we could be sending to other places in our infrastructure to improve our society, including education and rehabilitation for prisoners and other things like that to improve our society. So today, as has been eloquently stated by the member from Berkeley and the one from San Diego to my left, ladies and gentlemen, even if you don't have the guts, the onus in this action is going to be on the voters you represent. Do you not believe that they're intelligent enough to make a decision for themselves on what, in fact, they would like to do? Do you feel that it is your responsibility to deny them that choice? I believe all of the constituents, those that I represent in particular and those that you represent in general, deserve to have the choice and the question before them to make their own decision as they did before. We have discovered a fallacy in this law, no matter how sacred you think it is, which has caused billions of dollars and will cost billions of dollars over time. Ladies and gentlemen, the question before you is that we need to put before the voters of the state, the great state of California, the question of the third strike having a proportionate amount of time for the crime being served, and put our state in a position for us to efficiently and effectively manage the California criminal justice system. Finally, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Thank you.
Clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Mr. Davis moves the call. Okay, we have 2 bills on call. We're going to give the authors a little time to work their votes, and we're going to go to requests to adjourn in memory. Mr. Smythe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. What I wanted to do today really is just thank all of you, as well as our friends outside of the building, for your calls, your emails, your texts. Those of you who have lost your parents or lost a parent, you realize how much that really does help. It's been obviously a difficult time for my family over the last couple of weeks, but the words and support that we've received really have helped, and I just wanted to thank all of you for that. And just a little bit, about my dad. My dad lived a life of service. It started with his career in the military, serving in Korea. And he's a product of our UC system. He's a proud gaucho, one of the first classes from UC Santa Barbara. And, he always taught my brother and I about the importance of service. And, my brother is a colonel in the Air Force, and obviously I chose this path of service, which we all share that service gene. All of us that are here today served our communities before we got elected, and I know that when our time here is up, we'll all go back to serving, in another capacity. And so that's, the legacy that my dad had left. He always wanted, the old adage of leave your community, leave a place, better than when you found it. And, my dad led an amazing life, a full life, and our community is better because of him. Thank you.
Okay, the session schedule is as follows. Wednesday, February 1st, check-in session. Thursday, February 2nd, floor session at 9 a.m. Friday, February 3rd, no floor session, no check-in session. All other items remaining will be passed and retained. All motions shall be continued. The Budget Committee will be meeting upon adjournment in room 4202. The Budget Committee will be meeting upon adjournment in room 4202. So members, today is the House of Origin deadline. Any assembly bills that are on file that are not acted on today will not be taken up again this legislative session this year. So if there are any members that want to take up your assembly bill, today, right now is the time. We still have 2 items on call. Yeah. Okay, members, if members would like to change their vote, please raise your mic and we will recognize you at your desks. Mr. Garrick.
Thank you. Yes. Garrick, AB 467, from no to aye.
Garrick, Assembly Bill 467, no to aye.
Mr. Silva.
Silva, AB 467, change from no to aye.
Silva, Assembly Bill 467, no to aye.
Okay, we're ready to lift the call on file item 3, AB 327. Clerk will post. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 41, noes 33. Measure passes. Okay, we're going to lift the call on file item 6, AB 1148. Clerk will post. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the votes. Ayes 52, noes 26. Measure fails. Okay, this concludes the business on the daily file. I'm ready to entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Allen moves. Ms. Conway seconds that this House stands adjourned until Thursday, February 2nd at 9 a.m. Quorum calls lifted.